Football Focus's fantasy podcast that centers on Dynasty and Keeper Leagues. I'm your host, Scott Spratt, and I'm joined as always by Michael Moore. And Michael, I'm kind of still reeling from this incredible Super Bowl that we just witnessed. It's definitely one of the best ones that I remember from my adult life. What were your thoughts on the game? Did you have a good time? And I hope you got to take advantage of some of those prop bets that the PFF writers compiled on the website.
Well, first, yeah, I mean, the game was very exciting. I don't know that there was ever like a lull. You know what I mean? There was never a stretch where it was like, oh yeah, I could have like gotten some food or gone to the bathroom and not missed anything. Like it seemed like every second there was something going on. So you needed to watch like the whole game.
Absolutely.
As far as the prop bets go, I did partake in a few of them, and luckily I split. So I did 4 of them. I got 2 right. I got 2 wrong. The 2 I got right, which they both have something in common, were overs on receptions. So I correctly predicted Nelson Aguilar would have 3.5 catches, or more than that, and that Danny Amendola would have more than 4.5. So those were, I think, locked up by like the fourth quarter. However, I lost pretty bad on the LeGarrette Blount under 27 yards prop bet, which I should have known better. I shouldn't have gambled that with Jay Ajayi's ankle injury, sort of nagging him all week. But I digress. Anyway, but it was a good time. How about you?
Yeah, definitely. Michael, you definitely should have known that this was going to be the most yards ever in any NFL game. It's clearly you're bad that you didn't predict that correctly.
True. Touche.
All right, let's get this thing started.
Oh my God, it's picked off!
Topic 6.
All right, Michael, we've got a couple or 6 different topics that we want to hit on today, that some of which center on what we saw in the Super Bowl, but we'll branch out a little bit too to things that have happened in the last couple of weeks. I think we need to start again like we did last week with Nick Foles, though, because when we talked about him 2 weeks ago, I think our general consensus between the two of us was, first, that he had played well enough in the playoffs to earn himself a chance to start for another team next year, but we didn't think his track record justified a thought that he would be an effective fantasy quarterback next year. So now that he played this well again in the Super Bowl and has had these back-to-back great games, has your mind changed at all about how effective you think Foles would be if he got to be a starter next year?
I mean, I think it kind of has to at this point. I mean, he held his own. I mean, don't get me wrong. New England's defense wasn't exactly a true test of how good a quarterback he was. But look, he played pretty lights out the last couple of weeks. I mean, you can't be a spare and turn in performances like that. So I think he's definitely earned it. But the funny part is, like, I don't think Philadelphia could trade him now, even if they wanted to. They'd be lynched in Philadelphia for trading away the Super Bowl MVP in the offseason. And look, he's not going to start there next year, provided Carson Wentz is healthy. It's not like there's a quarterback controversy, but I mean, that would just be incredibly bad PR to trade away the now Super Bowl MVP to a team. No matter, I mean, look, I don't care what the compensation would be. There'd be Eagles fans that would be livid over that. So, but did he change some people's minds on how well he could play? I think he did, and I think he deserved it.
Okay, you gave me a couple of different thoughts that I want to unpack there one at a time, but I want to start with your idea that a bad quarterback, quote unquote, couldn't have a stretch like Foles just had. I'm not actually sure that's true, and the way that I sort of came up with to try to measure this was looking at quarterbacks' best 3-game passer rating stretches from this season. This includes both the regular season and the playoffs, but while there are a lot of Tom Brady's and Aaron Rodgers in that mix, there are some quarterbacks that we don't think of as being great quarterbacks that had passer rating stretches better than what Foles had in the playoffs. He had a 115.7 passer rating over those 3 playoff games. Andy Dalton beat that twice this year over 3-game stretches. Alex Smith beat it 3 times. Even everyone's favorite punching bag, Blake Bortles, beat that with a 128.6 passer rating from weeks 13 to 15. So, Michael, what do you think of the idea that sometimes, quote-unquote, bad quarterbacks can put together that kind of hot streak?
Yeah, okay. You're probably right. I'm not going to argue that a whole lot. I mean,
well, I didn't want it to come off as so depressing or as necessarily a shot at Foles'.
It does, Scott. It's a little depressing. I mean, and look, it's going to be very difficult, I think, for anybody to differentiate between Foles as over his career and over the larger sample size than these last 2 weeks. Because look, it's very common to just think of Nick Foles now as nothing but this very underrated, underdog quarterback that just lit the best teams in the NFL up. It's going to be very difficult to come back down to earth after that and go, you know what? He's just okay. I'm not saying it's not true. I agree with you. I think he's just okay, and that these performances were the outlier. It wasn't his times with Jeff Fisher that was the outlier, believe me. But it's going to be very interesting because, again, there's going to be so much, I guess baggage would be the term, to come with him, either from a fantasy or a real life standpoint in the offseason.
And I do want to clarify, I don't necessarily think that Foles isn't a good quarterback. I think there's a track record that suggests he might not be, but we've seen players sort of create this improved play. I kind of looked at this with passer rating too, and we've seen guys that have made a major bump from their previous recent track records and go on to have future success. So Foles showed about a 40-point bump in his passer rating based on compared to his previous few years over this stretch. Kirk Cousins had something very similar happen to him late in 2015, and we know that he became a very good fantasy quarterback for the next couple of years. Jared Goff did something very similar at the beginning of this year. Even Foles himself had a stretch like this back in 2013 that propelled him to a very good fantasy season. So we could treat this playoff stretch as an indication that he could be breaking out. There are definitely precedents for that before. But I guess my general takeaway is I don't think you can make a definitive case that that's what's going to happen. And if you do think he's going to break out, I would say take the time to think about, do you think that he's really any more likely to be breaking out now than Blake Bortles is? Because both of them showed a very similar increased performance later this season. I don't think it's fair to believe Foles and not Bortles just because Foles happened to end in a Super Bowl title.
Right. No, I agree. Again, it's just situations like this never come up. I mean, it's been decades since we've had the backup quarterback start a Super Bowl and win.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah.
And it's very interesting. This whole thing is interesting, from the game to the Patriots side of things to now what do we do with Nick Foles? It's all very fascinating, Scott.
Absolutely. Let's pivot over to question number 2, which is more about Nick Foles. This is the all Nick Foles edition of the Dynasty Slant.
As it should be, Scott. As it should be. He earned it. He earned at least that much the day after the Super Bowl to be the topic of the Dynasty Slant podcast, at the very least.
I completely agree with that. You mentioned, too, like what his situation is. Currently, he is under contract with the Eagles for next season for $7.6 million. His contract's a little kind of weird after that, but let's just go ahead and say that essentially he becomes a free agent after that time, which is more or less the case. The question then becomes, can the Eagles move him, and are they going to be willing to based on what other teams can bring in? You kind of made it sound like that your opinion is that the public opinion in Philadelphia is going to make it sort of an untenable situation for them to trade him. Is that sort of what your thinking is?
Yeah, this was the only. It kind of reminds me of when the Ravens won the Super Bowl a few years ago and Joe Flacco was a free agent. They had to re-sign him. They didn't have a choice, because if you let the quarterback go of your Super Bowl winning team, well, you'd have a mutiny like in town. And that's kind of what is happening here. Meaning, even if the Eagles lost that game last night by, when they were losing 33-32, if that was it, even that would have made it an easier situation to trade Foles for something in the offseason. But no, he won, and he was the MVP. They just can't do that. And don't get me wrong. And look, I know you've got some teams that he would make sense on, and I agree with all those. He'd be a great consolation prize this offseason behind Kirk Cousins and whatever happens in the draft. But I don't know how they can do that now. And you also got to look at the compensation they could be getting, right? So if you look at the other quarterbacks recently traded, you got Jimmy Garoppolo traded for a second, Alex Smith traded for a third, and then some. It's not like the Eagles are going to be suddenly getting a first-round pick for Nick Foles just because he won the MVP, right? You think they could?
Yes.
Wow.
It's not.
I don't think they could at all.
The issue here is with timing and contracts. Like when you see something like the Jimmy Garoppolo trade that just happened, the timing and contract situation had so much to do with their compensation the Patriots received for it, because the trade happened during the season. So there was less than a year left on his contract. The team would then have to pay him a full amount. You would have Foles now for the full year if they traded for him. So there's a difference there that makes a huge impact on how much value he can provide to a team. So I think those sort of considerations do come into play, which is why I think that the Eagles probably could get a king's ransom for trading Foles. And a lot of that might be because of this halo effect around a Super Bowl win that is deserved, but might influence how much people think he's worth as a player to them in the future. That may not actually be the truth.
Interesting. I don't think they could get. I don't think they could get more than what New England got for Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't think they'd get more than a second for him. I really don't.
So let me ask you this, because I kind of you made that Ravens analogy with Joe Flacco. That's interesting, but I think it kind of breaks down on this point. What would Eagles fans think? Who do they think is their best quarterback on the roster right now?
Well, it's probably not fair to ask them that today, meaning the day after they won the Super Bowl. But I think if you gave it, a few weeks or even a few months to cool down, the majority would settle back in and realize, no, Carson Wentz is really the better quarterback. And he is. And no one in their right mind would ever say that. So I think they would still say Carson Wentz is.
So maybe I'm just giving too much credit to the average fan, but I feel like the logical sort of view of this to take is, hey, like we know that Carson Wentz is the better quarterback, so like maybe we should try to cash in on Foles when he's a hot commodity like this. I mean, it's kind of a similar situation to what the Patriots had in that if you have two really good quarterbacks, then that's not a long-term sustainable situation because of the finances involved. So I almost feel like the Eagles, well, they obviously don't have to move him, but I feel like the amount that they might be able to get back for Foles could make it such that it's just too enticing an offer to pass up. But the real complicating issue here for me is what Carson Wentz's actual health status is. We haven't really talked about this a ton, but he didn't tear his ACL until December. So, like, Michael, when do you even think Wentz is going to be back next season?
You're right. And I think at the end of the day, because of that injury, that's why Foles won't be moved. I don't expect him to be moved for anything. And it's because they want to be doubly sure that, their quarterback situation is settled. I mean, you got to remember, the Eagles have spent the most money on their backup quarterbacks over the last couple of years. At first, it was, I think, Chase Daniel. Remember him? And they paid him a ton of money last year. They paid Nick Foles, for backups, a ton of money. Yeah. So that's just in their nature to sort of lock down that second quarterback position. So, and now you've got the injury, which, look, it's a serious injury. It's not like, Carson Wentz got the wind knocked out of him. This was a major injury. So I think for that reason, it is even less likely that they move him. I just can't see the Eagles moving him. Look, if they did get offered a king's ransom, I'm talking like maybe 2 ones. Okay, then I think they would be silly to say no. But I just don't see that being offered, and I don't see them moving him.
The one thing I'll say about Wentz's injury is, while an ACL tear obviously is a major injury, there's been a pretty strong recent track record of people coming back from those, even late in the season. So, Michael, I looked up to try to find anybody that tore his ACL in either December or January in recent seasons. Here's who I came up with. Adrian Peterson tore his in December of 2011, and he played week 1 of 2012. You'll say that, yeah, Peterson's a genetic freak, but Robert Griffin tore his ACL in January of 2012, so like the tail end of the 2012 season, and he played week 1 in 2013. He might not have played well, but he played. Rob Gronkowski tore his ACL in December of 2013. He played week 1 of 2014. Von Miller tore his ACL in December of 2013 as well, also played week 1 of 2014. Tyrann Mathieu tore his ACL in December of 2015 and played week 1 in 2016. The one guy that's kind of weird is Ryan Tannehill, who partially tore his ACL in December of 2016, but he didn't have reconstructive surgery, you may remember. They tried to just let that go and heal up on its own, but he fully tore it prior to the 2017 season this season. I'm going to throw that out because I think that the lack of surgery is sort of what precipitated that re-injury. Mm-hmm. But I know there's not a lot of quarterbacks and there's not a lot of sample there anyway, but it does seem like guys are bouncing back from ACL injuries much more quickly than they did, say, 10 years ago. So I feel like Wentz could be back ready to go at the beginning of the year, and then, maybe the Eagles will decide that the thing to do is trade Foles maybe later in the summer.
Yeah, I think it's going to all revolve around Wentz and how his recovery is. I could definitely agree with that.
All right, let's move on to topic number 3 then, which is one that I guess really shocked me after the game. And I guess that sort of thing can happen when people are let down by a Super Bowl loss, but maybe this should be something we take very seriously, Michael. After the game, Rob Gronkowski mentioned to media that he's uncertain about his football future. He told reporters that, quote, "I'm definitely going to look at my future, for sure. I'm going to sit down next couple of weeks and see where I'm at." So do you think that Gronk might actually be seriously considering retiring from football, Michael?
Yes, I give it some credibility, and it finally, at long last, is enough to make me knock him down a peg on my Dynasty rankings, which is breaking news.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that because previously, I mean, I think maybe even last week we were talking about the Gronk versus Travis Kelce argument.
Mhm.
Right now, your top 10 in Dynasty at tight end is Gronkowski, Travis Kelce, Zach Ertz, Evan Ingram, Hunter Henry, OJ Howard, Jimmy Graham, Kyle Rudolph, and Jordan Reed, and David Njoku.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not knocking Gronk down more than a spot. He's still my number 2, but
Okay.
there's just starting to be too much smoke with this for there not to be a fire between, the sort of, I'm not going to say delayed sort of recovery on the concussion, but it kind of lingered there, to his comments last night. Because like Gronk's usually a very positive, gung-ho kind of guy, and for there to be any kind of doubt now is a little disconcerting. I mean, he's usually very honest and very, even despite all the injuries, very proactive. But, last night, and look, could it be losing in such kind of a close, heartbreaking fashion? Sure, we can't discount that possibility. But, I think you have to start looking at that, especially, and I know we'll get to this in a little bit, but there's going to be a lot of changes there next year, in New England, between McDaniels probably leaving and whatnot. So, yeah, I put a little more confidence in something like that happening, and it's just enough to make me knock him down a peg. Again, still number 2 because he's a freak. He's the greatest tight end of all time. Did you see that over-the-shoulder catch he made for the touchdown?
Yeah, we were all losing our minds, yeah.
You can't defend that. It's undefensible. So, but, if he has – and look, I truly hope that if he has any doubt and he's worried about his health, he should. I'm not saying he shouldn't do what's best for him. It would just be a real shame if we didn't get more Gronk before we could.
You really couldn't criticize Gronk if he decided to walk away. I detailed this last podcast, but the research I had was that Gronk has suffered 12 major injuries in his football career in both college and pros, which now includes 2 concussions. So, I mean, obviously he's had an injury-riddled career. He's still really, really good, but while he's in good health, you could see the reasoning why that might be a smart decision for his future. Can you talk us a little bit more through the type of decision-making you had in your Dynasty rankings, though? Is this kind of a situation where you would say, like, hey, I think Gronk is maybe 20% more valuable in the future than Kelce, but I think he has a 25% chance to retire? Is that like the type of mental approach you're taking with this? Or like explain your thought process a little bit there.
Well, it was still, I mean, and as I mentioned before, it was razor thin as far as the margin between Gronk and Kelce. I mean, they were my clear top 2, no doubt about it.
But they were very much on the same tier of similar value in your mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
But, with the comments last night, recovering from the concussion, and, until I think we all see Belichick and Brady back on the field 2018, I think you have to have a little bit of doubt that this could be it. I mean, look, Brady's 40. Between him and Belichick, they've literally done everything they could ever do in the NFL. So it's not like they, are still trying to accomplish something. So for me, it was just that sort of, I guess, change of attitude in Gronk was enough for me to slip him down a peg. But again, it's still incredibly close, and they're still my clear top 2. But I think Kelce may be finally just a tad more reliable at this point.
Yeah, I think that's great. All right, let's move on to topic number 4, which you just touched on a little bit, and how much turnover the Patriots may face this offseason, in particular with offensive coordinator Josh McDaniels presumably leaving to become the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts. And I think it's already official, the defensive coordinator Matt Patricia is leaving to become the head coach in Detroit. So with all of these changes that are happening with the Patriots, Michael, do you think that there's anybody's fantasy value that might change drastically with whatever new coaching staff comes in place?
You mean on the Patriots, right?
On the Patriots specifically.
No, I don't. I mean, that is about as fine-tuned or well-oiled machine as you're ever going to find. For example, the offense has finished in the top 11 in yards every year since 2004, despite having 2 different offensive coordinators. You had McDaniels for 2 stints, but you had McDaniels and then Bill O'Brien and then back to McDaniels. They've been in the top 10 in points every year since 2004, but with McDaniels and with O'Brien. So No, I look, as long as Belichick and Brady are still there, you can, I think, bank on it, on the offense anyway, being a top 10 team. I don't see any individuals' value dipping or changing that drastically, for better or for worse. I think they're all still going to be very good options next year, and I think they're still going to produce at a high level.
I agree with you, Michael. I was investigating Tom Brady's yards per attempt, both with Daniels and without McDaniels as his offensive coordinator. And it didn't really change dramatically. When McDaniels left originally back in 2007, Brady was still actually pretty close to his 2007 quality, Super Bowl year yards per attempt, which is really high at the time. And then when he returned in 2012, McDaniels, Brady's yards per attempt dipped a little bit then relative to those previous seasons. I think there's just so many moving parts with this that it's hard to point to any coach and say what specifically his impact is on the team and on the fantasy production of the players involved. So while I do think McDaniels is a very gifted offensive play caller and will probably be a very good head coach, I agree with you. I just don't think Brady's numbers are going to take any drastic turns for the worse unless he actually starts to show signs of aging or things along those lines.
Right.
Okay, I think that was short and sweet. Why don't we move on to the fifth topic? The Panthers have seen the bulk of their coaching staff under head coach Ron Rivera turnover in the last few weeks. So, Michael, from a fantasy perspective, what do you think this is going to do to the Panthers, and I guess in particular with respect to the new offensive coordinator, Norv Turner?
Well, Scott, I know you're a fan. I know you are. You bleed black and blue, that bright,
absolutely,
whatever shade of blue that the Panthers are. So don't take this the wrong way, but I'm extremely concerned for the Panthers next year, Scott. I don't know about you. We haven't discussed this, but I'm extremely concerned for Cam Newton, Christian McCaffrey et al. Okay, you've got Norv Turner, who, I mentioned the Patriots, how they have been a top 10 team every year for 15 years, no matter who the coordinator. Well, Scott, Norv Turner, just so you know, has not had a top 10 offense as a coordinator since, do you know when the last time this was?
I'll take a random shot, the 91 through 93 Cowboys.
Yes, since he had, I don't know, 3 Hall of Famers and Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, and Michael Irvin at his disposal. Every stop he's had since then as an offensive coordinator has not come close to being top 10, Scott. I'm worried for you. Not so much the team, not so much the fantasy players. I'm concerned for you, Scott.
Well, you have your mind in the right place, but what about future Hall of Famers Cam Newton, Christian McCaffrey, and Devin Funchess? Hello, seems like just as good as Emmitt Smith in my mind.
Look, I will even spot you a Hall of Famer in Cam Newton because I really think he's on his way. Now, the other two, that's a hot take, Scott. That's an extremely hot take.
I may or may not believe what I just said.
Please try to deter me from thinking that.
Well, I probably am going to do a little bit of a bad job of this because a lot of the research I did related to Norv Turner was centered on fantasy running backs. And while I had a hard time sort of definitively saying whether Turner improved the performances of his running backs, it certainly has been the case that Turner has presided over a lot of really, really good running backs in his career. Guys like Emmitt Smith, Stephen Davis, LaDainian Tomlinson, Ricky Williams, Frank Gore, Ryan Matthews, and Adrian Peterson. And obviously the talent has a lot to do with that, but it has been the case that Turner has frequently committed to a single running back, which has made them very useful in fantasy. So, potentially that could be the case for the Panthers next season. Maybe they draft a guy. Maybe Turner is going to want to use Christian McCaffrey more heavily as a runner and not just as a passer or a pass catcher. I don't know. I think there are options there. But as for the continuity in the passing game and what it means for Cam Newton, I'm less sure. I was really worried the first time that Cam saw a turnover with his offensive coordinator, Rod Jasinski. But they've actually been pretty decent, really, with everybody under his reign. The real key to fantasy value for Newton has always been his running game. And as long as his coaches are going to let him run the ball, I guess I'm not too concerned for his fantasy future, Michael. What do you think about all those thoughts?
Well, no, and they're all valid, and I get it. I think, I tried to look for some kind of trend with Norv Turner, meaning does he pass more, does he run more? In the 26 seasons, he's been either an offensive coordinator or head coach. His teams have been in the top 10 in rushing attempts just 7 times.
Yeah.
So about, 20%, 20 to 22%. But they've only been in the top 10 in pass attempts 5 times in those 26 years. So you can't get a read on him. It's very curious. I'm very interested to see what Norv Turner does, and if he can pull it off. Because look, he obviously has a great reputation, at least warranted or not, that stretches back a long time. But I just don't know. I don't know what he's going to do with Cam and with Christian McCaffrey and all those other guys. So, look, hopefully he at the very least can know how to utilize his best players, but it's very hard to get a read on what that's going to look like at this point.
I agree with that. And I do think the key question is like, which way are the decisions going to flow? Like, is Turner going to come in and try to do what he likes to do as sort of his own style? Or will he try to take what Cam Newton does best and integrate that into his overall offensive philosophy? Like, I'm sure that Turner is probably never run like zone read concepts and stuff before, but he's never he's never had somebody like Cam Newton who that's a particularly useful way to approach the game with. So I'm going to give Turner the benefit of the doubt and say you can teach an old dog new tricks that way. But
although it would be pretty funny to imagine Troy Aikman running the read option. I mean, I don't know if he maybe introduced it and Troy was like, "Nah, man, I'm good." I don't know.
Troy's had a few too many concussions. You don't want to let him take those hits.
Touche.
All right, let's move on to topic number 6 then. Since our last show, Michael, Alex Smith got traded to the Washington Redskins. I'm not sure if you heard. We've talked about all of the players that are sort of involved in this, in the fantasy value for these guys in recent weeks, but I want to hit on these guys one at a time. So let's start with Michael. Do you think Alex Smith's dynasty value increases or decreases with this change?
For me, it actually increases a little bit. Not so much that I think his ceiling is much higher in Washington, but I think, to me, it gives him job security for a few years.
Yeah.
Meaning there was some doubt on where he was going to go after this season. Was he going to be automatically installed as a starter somewhere? Was he going to go compete for a job? What have you? But look, they traded him. They re-signed him to a pretty good size extension. I think he's locked in there for a while. So to me, it improves it just a tad. Because look, he's not 40 years old and trying to pull a Tom Brady. I mean, he's in quarterback prime time at this point. So no, I think he has improved his standing a little bit for me. What about you?
I agree. I don't think Smith is going to be more valuable than he was last year in fantasy in Kansas City, but having already come to the opinion that I didn't think he was going to be in Kansas City anymore, I think this is the best place that Smith could have gone for his fantasy value going forward. And in particular, I'll just point out that Chris Thompson, Ryan Grant, and Jamison Crowder were all really good receivers last year and are all short throw depth targets. So it seems like a natural fit given Smith's penchant to throw the ball accurately on short passes and throw those short passes a lot. And hopefully Jordan Reed could bounce back healthy next season too and add to that stable of weapons.
If Jordan Reed is healthy next year, which we all hope he is, he's going to be one of the most talked about drafted players in the 2018 season because people are going to see what Alex Smith did with Travis Kelce, and they're just going to be drooling over the possibilities with Jordan Reed. So just everyone get ready because Jordan Reed's about to be extremely valuable.
Absolutely. All right, the next one then is, do you think Kirk Cousins' dynasty value increases or decreases given that he's presumably not going to be the quarterback for the Redskins anymore?
I feel pretty comfortable saying this, that even though we have literally no idea where he's going to go, I think it bumps his value up a little bit. And the reason is he's going to get a big contract. It's going to be massive. So whatever team he goes to that signs him is going to have a lot of resources tied up in him. They have no choice but to have the offense revolve around him. They're not going to go. A run-first team is not going to, or at least a team that has a lot of money devoted to the running game is not going to be signing Kirk Cousins. I think whoever signs him is going to turn the offense over, and I feel pretty confident he's going to have more pass attempts wherever he goes than he did this year. So to me, I think it bumps it up a little bit there too.
I actually disagree with you here, Michael, for a rare change of things. And it's not that I disagree with your analysis necessarily. It's just that I think that the Redskins were particularly loaded with skill position talent. I mentioned some of the names specifically before, and I've talked a little bit about this yards added metric that I've come up with. And just looking at the receivers themselves, independent of their quarterback play, of all the teams that I think that Cousins could end up on, the Redskins were by far the best at 54 yards added by their receivers over the course of the season. That's about 3 times the total that the Jaguars had last year. They're the second team in this mix. And then the Vikings and Jets are the only other team with an above average set of skill position guys in yards added last year. Everyone else, the Browns, the Broncos, the Dolphins, the Bengals, the Bills, the Giants, the Cardinals, all of those other teams that I think might be in the mix were all below average. So even if Cousins does throw the ball more. I just don't think his receivers are going to be as effective as the ones he had in Washington last season.
And I understand that too. I think, the Washington receivers, and I think we probably talked about this before, are underrated compared to the rest of the league. So wherever he's going to go, whatever team has an opening, there's a good chance the receivers aren't better there than they were in Washington. So I could see that side too.
Okay, one last guy to consider here. Where do you think Pat Mahomes now ranks in Dynasty now that we know for sure that he's going to be a starting quarterback at the start of next season?
It doesn't really move the needle a whole lot for me on him because of this move. I still put him where I put him before, which was 20th. He might move up a little bit, but not necessarily because of this move. Because, look, quite honestly, I had him ranked there assuming this was going to be the plan, meaning, hey, he was going to take over this year. So he's not going to move up much, at least on my stuff.
Yeah, I think that was the correct way to think that through. So that was a good job by you there, Michael. Just to give people an idea, Michael has Mahomes at 20. He has Roethlisberger and Rivers at 19 and 18. And I think that's really a situation where, depending on the state of your Dynasty team's competitiveness, might influence your choice there. But then you have Derek Carr at 17 and Jared Goff at 15 are the other sort of younger guys that are in the mix with Mahomes there for value. So just to give guys a little bit of perspective there. All right, that closes up the topic 6. And Michael, we've got a new segment that we want to introduce right now. This is very exciting, so let's hit the music.
You'll all get through this. I give you my word as a real doctor.
Ask Dynasty Dr. Michael.
How'd you like that, Michael?
It will probably be the only chance I have to be a doctor, so I will take it.
Hey, this is the only kind of doctor I would ever want to be, personally.
Oh, touche.
Okay, so the idea behind this segment is that we're going to reach out to all of you fans on Twitter, everyone that listens to the show, and ask you guys what you want us to talk about, and then let Dr. Michael sort of give you a prescription of what you need to do for your Dynasty teams. And so let's start that with a tweet from Jeff Eaton, who asks, after this year and considering the state of their respective teams, are A.J. Green or Mike Evans still considered keepers in a 3-keeper league?
See, this is really tough, especially Evans, because I know we've talked about this before. And, Evans obviously had a down year, but that's only relative to the years he had before, meaning he had elite production there. So, as far as Evans goes, though, to me, having Jameis Winston at quarterback is very what's the word I would use? It's very exciting, I guess, and not necessarily in an all good way.
A lot of downs, yeah.
Right, meaning it's you never know what you're going to get. Okay, so you could get bad Jameis, you could get good Jameis. So as far as that goes, to me, Evans probably isn't anymore. AJ Green to me still is. He's been doing it a very long time, and he's still with Andy Dalton at quarterback of all people. And I would still consider AJ Green up there, but Evans, I think I could understand if he wasn't one of your keepers. How about you?
Well, I hate to make it all about yards added because I know that maybe not a stat that everyone's super familiar with if they haven't been reading what I've been writing about. But I will say that Evans showed a really troubling trend before last season where his yards added, which is, you can sort of think of it as his efficiency as a receiver given the nature of the target that he gets. And it dipped hugely before 2016 and stayed down all the way through 2017, and his fantasy value followed. I just want to point out that A.J. Green's efficiency has fallen off a cliff over the last year. So frankly, I don't want to keep either of these guys as a top 3-round pick. I would be selling them and looking to buy Chris Godwin and John Ross in their offenses, even though I'm not sure any of those guys is necessarily a top 3-round keeper pick right now. All right, question number 2 comes from Ian, and he asks you, Michael, are Joe Mixon and Mitchell Trubisky worth hanging on to? He says that he knows that Melvin Gordon struggled his rookie campaign and then came on strong in year 2, as did Goff and Wentz. What should he do with Mixon and Trubisky?
Well, look, it's very hard for me to move on from any player after 1 year, right?
Yes.
That's the case in Mixon and Trubisky. To me, I would still hold on to them. The players that you mentioned, whether it was Gordon, who came on in year 2, Goff and Wentz, obviously, the big thing in at least Gordon's and Goff's case was they had new coaches come in. They had new coordinators or a new head coach and completely did a 180 as far as their production goes, which luckily for Mixon and Trubisky is the same case. meaning they've got a new offensive coordinator in Cincinnati. They've got a new head coach in Chicago for Trubisky. So, look, it's still very possible that those two guys can turn it around and be extremely productive. So I think it's way too early for that. I would definitely hold on to them.
And I actually think Mixon was a pretty effective player in 2017, even if his fantasy value didn't measure up to that.
Well, and I think to your point, yes, he was very good. I think Mixon gets a little bit of a bad rap only because there was a time there when he was going first in rookie drafts. I mean, I remember it. He was shooting up rookie draft boards because people thought, oh, he's probably the only one of this class that could pull the 3-down duty better than anyone else. Because remember, Leonard Fournette, a lot of doubts about his receiving ability. Christian McCaffrey was viewed as a out of the backfield pass catcher, not necessarily a 3-down guy. Mixon was really appealing because people thought, oh, he could do first, second, and third down. So, there's going to be a lot more expectations if you're taken first in rookie drafts compared to other guys. And look, I understand if people were a little disappointed that they didn't get what they thought they were getting, but to your point, he still had a very good season.
He did, and I actually think the 3-down back thing is going to happen for him, maybe even as soon as this season. And the evidence I would point to there is that, one, Mixon wasn't a bad blocker his rookie season. He was pretty much neutral by PFF grade. And two, he was the number 7 running back in total yards added, that metric that I won't shut up about, behind Todd Gurley, Chris Thompson, Duke Johnson, Alvin Kamara, Giovanni Bernard, who obviously is a teammate, and Lamar Miller. And so I think even if you don't necessarily buy into the stat itself, that's a pretty good association just in terms of guys that can take those third down receptions that a lot of running backs can't do. So I have a lot of optimism about Mixon's value in the future and would tell you to definitely stick with him in particular.
Well, and I will use as my source, Scott, a tweet from Jeremy Hill himself 5 days ago that said he was moving on. So I take that as a sign that it may be the Joe Mixon show now.
Yep, I think that makes a lot of sense. All right, their next Twitter question comes in from Cover 4, who asks, who holds better long-term value, Joe Mixon, who we've just been talking about, or Davante Adams?
To me, and again, this goes back to a general feeling that if you can find a squared-away receiver, that's probably more valuable, at least in a dynasty league, than a squared-away running back, only because their role seems a little more concrete. I would go with Davante Adams personally. He just signed that extension in Green Bay. Look, right now, he's the youngest / best receiver Aaron Rodgers has. Jordy Nelson is getting old and more broken. Randall Cobb is a good candidate to get cut this offseason. Davante Adams is the number 1 guy. And you've got Aaron Rodgers at quarterback who's coming back. So, and again, that's not to take away from Joe Mixon. I think he'll be very serviceable. But, I mean, I just go back to thinking how productive was Jordy Nelson at his peak. And I think Davante Adams can get there. So, to me, I would take Davante Adams.
Yeah, Nelson and Adams have been going in the opposite directions in terms of their efficiency in recent seasons. I wrote some things about this during the season that I think I'm now wrong about. I think Adams clearly is the number 1 guy for the Packers right now, and that makes him very, very valuable in dynasty formats. All right, we have one more tweet, but I actually want to steal that for the Gunpoint banner section, so let me play that. But first, I just want to thank everybody for sending in their dynasty tweets to us. This is something that we're going to do throughout the offseason. If we didn't answer your tweet, we may just try to respond to it, or it may be because we tried to cover that topic in other sections in the show. So don't get too offended if we didn't, but we'll try to get to it in future weeks too, if we can make that happen.
And if you're listening, and hopefully you're not driving, but you're sitting down in a stationary position, you can tweet at Scott. What is it? At Scott _Spratt. Yeah. Or at PFF_Moore, MOORE. No, I do not spell my last name with 1 O. It's still 2 O's.
All right, great. Let's do some Gunpoint banner.
Guys.
Gunpoint banter.
All right, Michael. As I mentioned, I stole a tweet to come up with a topic for this because I couldn't do it myself. So luckily, Fletcher Bacote asks, I had the 2nd pick in a rookie draft, and I'm assuming that Saquon Barkley goes first no matter what. As an aside, I agree. That's going to happen. So he asks, is Darius Geis the clear best pick, or are there other players to consider with that number 2 rookie draft pick? So, Michael, who do you think should be the 2nd pick in Dynasty rookie drafts?
Well, and look, I want to preface it by saying there's still a lot of time before,
Yes.
rookie combines and pro days. So obviously it's going to be very fluid. But if you are having a rookie draft anytime soon, to me, Geis is the consensus number 2 pick right there. I don't think it's even a question. He's graded very well according to our PFF graders. He had the 7th best elusive rating last year amongst this class's running backs. By comparison, by the way, Saquon Barkley was 16th in elusive rating. Geis was also 7th in the percentage of yardage, 7th in percentage not tackled on first contact, whereas Barkley was 51st in said category. So, and again, that's not to say I think Geis is better than Barkley, although, you could maybe make a case too for that. But I think because of all that, and I think there's now a reputation of players at LSU that they might be a lot better than they were in college. And look, Geis was pretty good in college. I mean, it's not like he disappointed. So for all those reasons, I put him at number 2, and it's not a question for me.
Yeah, if Geis follows in Leonard Fournette's footsteps, then I'm super wrong, and he should be the number 2
Yeah,
guy.
sign me up, believe
But
me.
I do have a bit of an unconventional opinion that I think Sony Michel, the running back from Georgia, should be the number 2 pick in Dynasty formats. He's really only recently been considered as a top running back prospect, and I think that's probably a lot to do with his Rose Bowl MVP when Georgia came back and beat Oklahoma. But I like him as the number 2 Dynasty pick for a few reasons. The first is that he's 5'11", 215 pounds, so he's actually almost identical in size to Geis, and so he isn't too small the way that, say, like Bryce Love might be, to see 200 or more total touches in a season. So that's one. 2, Michel saw 10% of his college touches come as receptions compared to just 6% for Geis. So he's getting that work as a receiver, which I think is very important in the modern fantasy game. And Michel averaged 9.7 yards per reception in college compared to 7.8 for Geis. So I would say of those 2 players, I think Michel is the more likely to be a 3-down back. And even if they do become specialized, I think Michel has the fantasy advantage by being the more likely to be a 3rd-down guy, getting those receptions. You can actually generate good fantasy value with that type of workload. Guys like Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, and Duke Johnson sort of provide that template. So I'm going to go with the better, what I think, all-around player for fantasy purposes, even if he's not necessarily as talented as Geis in the general sense of the word. What do you think of that, Michael?
I don't disagree with your points. And look, in all fairness, Geis did not catch the ball well last year. He just didn't. I think he was 81st in catch rate, according to our PFF graders. So I totally get that. And also to your point, it's a copycat league, and I think teams are going to see what the Saints did with Kamara, like you said, the Panthers did with McCaffrey. And look, they're going to draft running backs fairly high that specialize in that kind of thing. I mean, look, Kamara went in the 2nd, McCaffrey went top 10 overall. So it's very possible that teams saw Michel play, especially down the stretch, and thought to themselves, hey, he can do that for my team. I mean, obviously, a lot is going to be contingent on where these guys land. But look, it will definitely help their case, especially in Michel's case, if he can do a little bit of everything. That means he's got a much better chance to get on the field a lot sooner.
Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Dynasty Slant. Thanks for everyone that's been listening, and try to subscribe if you haven't. We're part of the PFF Fantasy Specialty podcasts that include our IDP and DFS shows. I will mention that Michael and I are going to be doing this every other week throughout the entire offseason, so we're going to get into a lot more about which rookies are the best rookie picks, and just all of our thoughts about the guys that changed teams, who played well and didn't play well last year. We just got a lot to keep you interested, so don't be too depressed that the Super Bowl is over and we've got a few more months before the NFL season starts again. Michael and I have your back. Thanks again, and then we'll look forward to talking to you guys in a couple of weeks.